All right, well, we'll get started here. Hopefully most folks kind of jump in and filter in as we start going through, but we can absolutely get started with introduction. So thank you for joining, right? We're going to be talking today about the CMMC, right, or the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and the essential next steps you need today in order to prove maturity tomorrow, essentially. And so just a little bit of background information on myself and the company I work for, CompuData. My name is Drew Rosado. I am the client vCIO here at CompuData. I also lead up our accounts management team, along with our big planning and strategic planning with all of our clients, or the majority of our clients. I work for CompuData. CompuData has been serving the Philadelphia area, right, and more recently kind of globally for the last 5 decades, last 50 years. We just hit our 50th year anniversary this year. We have 4 major pillars to our business, right? Cloud hosting being one of them, ERP software, right? We are a Sage Diamond partner. We also do IT security and managed IT services. Part of that, right? We like to say we take a holistic view or a holistic approach to helping our clients and our partners. And part of that is understanding compliancy in the various aspects that it comes in, right? Whether it's DoD contracts, healthcare, financial services, what have you. Okay. So today we're going to be taking a high-level look at specifically contracts that have to do with the DoD and the federal government, right? Over the last couple of years, we've heard of NIST Special Publication 800-171, and more recently, if you're on this particular meeting, you're probably dealing with or been hearing about CMMC, or the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. So we're going to take a look at both of those kind of in separately and then together. We'll start looking at the 130 controls for CMMC. The process and procedures that you need to go through in order to start building and developing your documentation as you move forward. We'll look at what a POAM is, or a plan of action and milestones, right? The ongoing requirements of the CMMC, and then any additional resources we can provide. And I'll open up the end for some Q&A. There's typically a lot of questions around this. What do I have to do next? Hopefully I'll answer some of those along the way, but if there's any remaining questions, we'll certainly get to them at the end. Before we jump in, though, there is a huge alphabet soup here of acronyms that we should probably go over. And this is just some of them. There are many more. So forgive me if I start referring to them. I will try to stop myself and make sure I pay close attention to these specifically. So first and foremost, the CMMC, right, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. It is the newest version, the newest certification process that is being developed by the DoD and the CMMC accrediting body. Then you have CMMC RPOs, or registered provider organizations. These are organizations that are certified to provide readiness assessments and consulting to clients or companies who are looking to get CMMC certified. C3PAOs, this is a different type of organization, also known as a certified third-party assessor organization, that can do more than just the readiness assessments. In fact, they're going to do the actual audit or the evaluation of a company who is attempting to meet a maturity model certification. Okay, so if you're going to look at the two of these, right, the RPO can do consulting, but they are not allowed to do the assessment, while C3PAOs are allowed to do the assessment. Right, the final assessment. It is important to note that if a company, or if an RPO is helping you, or if a C3PAO is helping you with a readiness assessment, they cannot be the same organization that does the official assessment. This is very similar to ISO, if you're familiar with those requirements. NIST Special Publication 800-171 has been around since about 2015. It is the NIST Special Publication that provides recommended requirements for protecting and securing the confidentiality of what's called CUI, and CUI is controlled unclassified information. Now, CUI and FCI, which is also on the screen, federal contract information, are two different forms of information, right? Federal contract information is any information provided by or provided to the government based on a contract, right? While CUI takes that a step further and is information that is provided by or provided to the government that has some type of regulation, legislation, or some type of protection around it, right? There is another form of information that we talk about as well called CTI, which is controlled technical information, which is, if you're in the manufacturing world, and you build a component that goes onto some type of aerospace vehicle, it would be considered CTI because it is controlled technical information. You have technically drawings that go on to most of the time aerospace or aeronautic vehicles. So a lot of alphabet soup there, right? And I'll try to be as conscious as I possibly can about when I use those and kind of moving forward. So if we're looking at CMMC and looking at NIST, these are terms that are, CMMC is newer, NIST has been around for a little while. However, in the last year and a half, we've really seen a ramp up of NIST 800-171 requirements coming out. Usually it's from a bigger prime contractor, a Boeing, a Lockheed Martin, someone of that size, usually coming down to the subcontractors that they use and saying, hey, you need to hit NIST 800-171 requirements, or you risk losing your contracts. And that's really has always been the case. However, it's been brought to the surface because of CMMC, right? CMMC, the Cybersecurity Model Certification, was really kind of put into place in 2019 and has really started gaining traction over the last year. Now it's been delayed a little bit, and we'll talk about that due to the pandemic, as most things were. But as we're prepping and as we start looking towards the future, the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, we want to make sure that we're starting to prep ourselves to ensure that we can meet the maturity model that we need to meet. And we'll talk a little bit about that, right? So what are you doing today? What is the current state of affairs? Well, first things first, if you're in here, you've probably heard about NIST 800-171 and the self-assessment, right? And here's the general idea of the NIST 800-171 self-assessment, right? Is to identify and detect anything that is wrong in your system, right? We would protect it, respond to it, recover if we have to, right? And then kind of keep that process going over and over and over again. The real goal here is to ensure that you have the necessary security parameters or security features in place to ensure that data isn't just going to be roaming around. One of the biggest concerns that we have, or that the federal government has, is what's called island hopping, right? Where a bad actor enters your system and isn't necessarily trying to attack you, but trying to get to other entities in the chain, right? And we've seen this type of attack in recent years, right? Even most recently with the Colonial Pipeline incident. Also, we've also had other major breaches with FireEye, even the state of Baltimore ransomware, right? And so that's what really this is trying to protect, is ensuring that every organization in what's called the defense industrial base has at least a baseline security in place to protect themselves and ultimately protecting the federal government as well. And so what is the correlation here, right? I said, we looked at CMMC, we looked at NIST 800-171, we're looking at CMMC now. What is the correlation here? What do we need to be looking at? Well, NIST 800-171 has 110 controls, right? Each of those controls is broken up into domains. All this means is that there's a long list, it's a long checklist, right? It's a scorecard that you have to go through and say, yes, I have this in place today, or no, I don't, right? And then you have to submit your score to the SPRS. Now, the great thing is that if you've already done NIST, or if you're doing NIST now and you're kind of going through that self-assessment, you're really setting yourself up to really be in a good place when it comes to CMMC, because CMMC takes the 110 controls that are part of the NIST 800-171 framework and expands on them by 20 controls. And that's what makes up the CMMC or the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification up to level 3, right? And there are 5 levels all in all. And so when you're looking at your NIST 800-171 self-assessment, you really want to say, okay, where are we today with NIST 800-171? And how does that compare to the 130 controls or 130 practices that we see in CMMC, right? And so most of the time when I'm speaking to clients and they're coming to me and they're saying, hey, I'm really not sure what we should be doing, where we should be at, or how we should be starting this, the first thing I always tell them is, have you done the NIST 800-171 self-assessment? If the answer is yes, great, we can start there and we can start kind of dissecting that and really kind of digging in. If you haven't, that's a great place to start, right? That's a great entry point to getting yourself prepared to do CMMC in the future. So what do you need to know today and beyond, right? Again, we're trying to prepare companies for what's coming down, right, down the lane a bit. And so what do you need to know? Well, the first things first, I've been doing this for a number of a couple of years now, right? I am myself am a CMMC registered practitioner, which means I passed my certification through the CMMC accrediting body to provide consulting and advice to companies like maybe yourselves who need CMMC or need to meet CMMC requirements. So most of the things that we're looking at is ensuring that you have the necessary pieces or necessary components in place today so that you're ready for tomorrow. And the biggest piece of that when you're looking at whether it's NIST 800-171 or CMMC is usually documentation. This is usually where most companies fall short. Okay, so depending on the level you have to meet, CMMC is broken up across five different levels. Level 1 being the basic cyber hygiene, total of 17 practices, pretty easy to hit. Most of us have these in place. Level 2 is what we would consider intermediate cyber hygiene, total 72 total practices. And those 72 include the 17 from level 1, right? So it's compounding here. And then level 3 is what we would consider good cyber hygiene. And that's 130 total practices. That includes all the practices from the 2 previous levels, plus the additional from the NIST 800-171 and an additional 20 on top of that, giving us a total of 130 practices across the 16 domains. But again, this is all nice and it's all good information, but what are the key items that you need to put into place? Well, CMMC, when you break it down in all honesty, the first M in CMMC, the maturity piece of it, is really the key to moving forward. Okay, the maturity is what the assessors are going to be looking for, is that you have taken cybersecurity as a part of your company, right? Not just this kind of island that you sometimes, dabble in, but it's truly a piece of your environment, a piece of your organization that you are actively practicing, right? And that's really what the assessors are looking to see. And so I've spoken to clients and they've said, hey, we're just going to wait and see what happens. I really don't recommend that approach because when you go to get your final assessment, to get your CMMC level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 assessment, the assessors are going to want to see that you've been practicing what you're preaching or what you're putting out in front of them for quite some time, right? That it's not just a new policy that you've put in place because you needed to hit this certification. And so some of the key policies that we see that are most of the time lacking with clients are acceptable use policies, right? Do your users know what is allowed and not allowed, in your environment and how to use the resources that they have available to them? Do you have an incident response policy, right? Do you know what happened? What are your steps, right? What steps do you need to take if there is an event, a cybersecurity event in your environment? Do you have a disaster recovery policy and have you tested it, right? Do you know how you would fail over or how you would come out of a disastrous event that occurs in your environment? Change management. How do you manage the change or the evolution of your technology policies, right? Is there a policy that you have that kind of governs that process? If you need to make a change on a server or on a firewall or anything like that, is there a process in place and do you follow it? And then what physical controls do you have in place? Do you have everything locked behind, doors? Do you have access control panels or, access control with key fobs? Do you have surveillance cameras around the facility? These are all things that you're going to want to look at and also put policies behind so that you know how you do business from a cybersecurity standpoint, right? And again, that's very different than what NIST required, at least in its early days, NIST 800-171, where it just went through and it asked you, do you have these things in place? Yes or no. And then you had to say, okay, I'm going to put these in place, in the next year, as opposed to CMMC, which says you have to have these in place now in order to move on to the next step. So again, just going a little bit deeper here, right? So again, level 1, I usually only talk about level 3 because that's where most clients are going to fall. Level 5 is a much higher standard, right? It's a much more rigorous standard to obtain. And so when we look at these steps, these are really transitional steps. I find that most companies are going to fall between level 1 and level 3 certification. Level 2 is a transitional certification, right? It's a transitional step between level 1 and level 3. And so when you're looking at level 1, you have basic safeguarding of federal contract information, okay? This complies with FARS 52204-21. Okay, this is baseline security, or what we call basic cyber hygiene. It's been laid out since 2015. This clause in particular has been laid out since 2015, and it says that you have to have at least the basic safeguarding parameters in order to deal with government contracts, or in order to have what's called FCI, or federal contract information. As you move into level 2, again, this is that transitional period. It means that you're starting to get, or you have some CUI, controlled unclassified information. And so naturally, you have to start putting greater security in place. This is, again, going to build off the 17 practices from level 1. It's going to include another 48 to give you a total of 72, right? And then there's 2 processes, right? And those processes are where you're starting to look at documentation. Okay, level 1 doesn't require documentation. Do I encourage you to have documentation? Yes, 100% yes. But do you need to have it necessarily to meet your level 1 certification? No. When you get into level 2, you are going to need documentation for each one of the domains that you need to hit, right? And then as you get to level 3 is considered good cyber hygiene, right? And it's protecting CUI at all cost. So again, building on the previous practices, you're going to get up to 130 practices and 3 processes. Again, more documentation there. And why is this documentation important? Why do I keep bringing it up? Why do I keep talking about these processes? Because when you go through a CMMC, any level, right, level 1 through 3, you are going to need to provide evidence to the auditor, right? And that evidence comes in 2 of 3 forms, right? You can provide two of 3 different forms of evidence. One is a written documentation that outlines how you do business, right? What is your policy around your cybersecurity practices? 2, it can be a test of the policy, right? Show me how it works, right? And 3 is probably going to be an interview with the individual who's responsible for that particular portion, right? So whether it's your IT manager, your cybersecurity expert, maybe it's your CFO, right? All those, you're going to have to go through a series of interviews to ensure that what you're saying is in line with all the policies that you're building. Once you go through and you identify all the gaps, right? Especially for NIST 800-171 and for CMMC, you're going to need to build a plan of action and milestones, right? Or what we call a POAM, right? And this is going to remediate any missing policies or procedures, right? So it's going to address the security gaps. You're going to say, these are the met and unmet controls that we have in our environment today. You're going to develop a system security plan, which basically outlines everything you're doing in regards to the 110 controls, especially for NIST, or the 130 controls when it comes to CMMC. Okay, that system security plan is basically a roadmap or a quick outline of how you're doing business today. And it's not simply just a yes, we have this in place, but it's a yes, we have this in place, and this is what we do about it, right? This is how we function today. And so there is some narrative that belongs there. It's also going to ask for a network topology, right? Understanding what the environment looks like. This is something that you can always, if you're using, if you have internal IT, they'll be able to help put this together. Or if you're using a managed service provider or a cloud service provider, they should be able to help with this as well. And then you're going to want to create a remediation timeline, right? How long is it going to take us to fill the gaps, right? Or to kind of remediate anything that is left as open. Step 2 is that you're going to want to add any new solutions, right? The first thing is that you're going to want to develop the inventory asset list, right? And a network diagram, right? I just mentioned that. That's going to be, again, taking a strong inventory of your environment and then start evaluating solutions that you're going to need to put in place in order to check some of those boxes that might have been left open in either the NIST 800-171 or CMMC pre-assessment or readiness assessment. And then you're going to want to contract solutions for security, compliance, and support, right? So this is again, are you using a managed service provider today? Do they have solutions that can help you meet the requirements or the open items that you are missing today? Step 3 is, again, going back to those policies and the documentation. I cannot stress enough how important these are, because you're going to need to create a library of policies, right? Not just one policy, not an acceptable use policy, but again, the acceptable use policy, the incident response policy, the disaster recovery policy, the change management policy, IT governance policy, essentially, right? Keep all testing reports and logs. So you're going to want to start pulling reports so you can identify where the holes in your system are, and keeping a track of those logs, right? How long are we keeping logs? And logs are, again, not to get too technical, but what's happening in the system? Do we have evidence to show, like, when there is there might have been a breach or an attempted breach, right? And then create a revision log, right? As you're going through and updating these documents, again, maturity being the key here, right? Maturity, 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 especially for CMMC. Do you have a revision log? Your assessor is going to want to come in and review your policies and show and see, I'm sorry, not show, you're going to want to show, they're going to want to see that you have been updating your policies the entire time. You've done a revision once every quarter, or maybe you do it biannually, or maybe you just do it annually, but they're going to want to see the revision log that shows that you're, again, taking this along with you as you're doing business. This is a living, breathing part of your business. Okay. And then the last part is building the process for documentation, right? Who is the owner? Who's going to be the owner of this document moving forward? Is it the IT manager? Do you have a compliance manager? Is it going to live with the CFO or the CEO, right? Depending on the size of your business and the structure, you're going to need to designate ownership of those documents. As you go through, you're going to want to update your timelines, especially after you've created your remediation timeline. Can you complete all the tasks that you have to complete in the time that you've designated, right? Are you revisiting that? Are you changing that? The idea here is that it needs to get done and you can't just let it fall. And then schedule a reassessment, right? As you go through, you're going to need to identify, hey, now it's time to reassess. Where do we stand today? We've put in the remediation steps, or we've gone through our remediation steps. How do we stack up today as we did, as opposed to yesterday? And that's always going to be an important part, right? This is, again, a cyclical process, especially because when it comes to CMMC, you're going to need to reevaluate once every 3 years. So what's going to happen beyond the initial CMMC certification, right? As we get through, hey, you go through and you get your initial CMMC certification. Well, you're going to want to do the ongoing maintenance and support, right? You probably want to work with an MSP that is certified or certified RPO, right? Again, this is important because I know there's a lot of documentation out there. There's a lot of companies who are jumping in on this, stating that, you know, they can help provide support for CMMC, but it's important to team up with companies who are RPOs or C3PAOs, as they have been certified by the accrediting body, that they know what they're talking about, essentially, right? But you're going to want to team up with an MSP that is certified. Maybe your MSP is certified, or they're looking to get certified. And if that's the case, then great, right? You're going to want to work with them. Ongoing monitoring and reporting that aligns with CMMC. Can the MSP, right? Again, this is why it's important to meet with one of these RPOs or C3PAOs, which is, can they provide reporting that's in line with what the CMMC is going to require when you get your certification? Are you doing any incident reporting, right? You're going to want to start pulling cybersecurity incident reporting and making sure you have copies and logs of that information, and then update based on the security requirements, right? Are you updating your system based on new standards, right? We know that CMMC is still in flux a bit, right? It's still kind of being hashed out to some degree. The base practices are there. The base policies are there. We know what's required, but those are going to change. We know that those are going to change. All security policies change, and all security requirements change. And so are you keeping up to date with those? Again, looking at the procedures and documentation, this is essential, right? This is essential that you upkeep these documents, right? As the foundation of all cybersecurity, right? Are you updating and revising quarterly? Again, I say quarterly, that's usually what I like to do. My opinion is that it's a good way of just kind of keeping up to date, especially with the way things have changed recently, right? We're going through a pandemic. We know that the way we do business might have changed a bit. And so we have to adjust our policies to meet the new standard, right? Whether that's work from home or hybrid or what have you, right? And then implement new applications when applicable, right? Implement new features when applicable. And then, or even new policies when applicable. And then finally, like I said, once every 3 years, you're going to need to get recertified. So that's why it's important to do steps 1 and 2 here and make sure that you're keeping up to date with not only the tools that you have in place and the security parameters that you have in place, and you're hardening your environment from a security standpoint, you're keeping up with those processes and those policies, right? But then you know that when you go to get recertified, you're going to be in a much better place, right? And then as you're going through this, the question is, can you hit the next level or should you hit the next level? Maybe you're level 1 today and you want to go for level 2, or maybe you're level 2 and you want to go for level 3, or maybe you're level 1 and you want to go for level 3, right? In any case, are you ready? Do you have the necessary features in place in order to hit the next level if you want to go that high? And what do the levels really mean? Well, level 1 is really going to be set for companies who maintain very little, right? It's very light, quote unquote, federal contract information. But is there an opportunity for you to enter a new market by getting to level 3 and providing different services for a different branch of the government, right? Maybe, again, the DoD, but maybe the Air Force, the Navy, maybe another prime, maybe Lockheed or Boeing or something of that sort. So what do you do now, right? That's a ton of information. I've just kind of laid it all out on the table. And so what do you do now? Let's kind of streamline this just a bit more. First thing you're going to want to do is that if you haven't done, or if you're in the middle of doing it, complete your NIST 800-171 self-assessment. It's going to be a key component moving forward. It's where I start as a consultant, right? Kind of going through, it's just where I think is the easiest place to start. Plus, you're going to start hearing, if you haven't already, a lot of prime contractors coming back and asking their subcontractors for proof that they've completed their NIST 800-171 self-assessment. I'm speaking about this from experience because I know a number of my clients have come back and said, hey, our prime contractors are asking that we do the self-assessment and that we provide a score to them and to the SPRS. Once you've done that self-assessment, start building the POAM, right? The plan of action and milestones. What are you going to do moving forward in order to ensure that you're meeting the requirements needed to either hit and complete the NIST 800-171 self-assessment, but also looking forward at CMMC levels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right, as you go on. The next important piece here is going to be to determine ownership. I can't tell you how many times I see where a company will do step 1 and step 2, but then fall short on step 3, and it prevents them from moving forward because no one has ownership of this, right? Who is going to be the owner of this policy or of this compliance feature? Does this live with is there a committee that needs to be formed, or does this solely live with IT? This is something that you're going to have to determine based on your company. Once you've done step 3, you're going to definitely want to identify a CMMC RPO or a C3PAO, perhaps to help you go through and do a readiness assessment, right? And again, this is getting an organization that is well versed in CMMC in your bring them into your organization, let them ask the questions, the hard questions, and let them dive in a little bit to help prepare you for the certification level that you need to meet. Now, again, an RPO is allowed to do consulting and provide support for the readiness assessment, but they are technically not allowed to do the official assessment, right? Only a C3PAO is allowed to do the assessment. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't go to a C3PAO and have them do a readiness assessment. They can do that, but if they do the readiness assessment, they're not going to be able to provide any consulting. They can kind of give you a baseline of, hey, here's what your score would be, and then they have to wash their hands of it. They can't ask anymore if they are going to be the assessing company in the future. If you're calling in a C3PAO and you want them to be a consultant, they can be the consultant, but they can't do your assessment as well. There's a conflict of interest there, naturally. And then finally, once you have steps 1 through 4 done, you want to start your remediation process, right? Any of the gaps that have been identified or have been found, you're going to want to make sure that you're going through and cleaning those up, ensuring that you're ready for the real assessment moving forward. So how do you work with accrediting with accredited organizations? Well, you can absolutely go to the CMMC AB marketplace. Again, the CMMC Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification accrediting body marketplace. Get a mouthful there, right? And you can see all the companies who are certified RPOs. You can see all the companies that are certified C3PAOs. You can even get down as far as seeing individuals who are either registered practitioners, certified professionals, or certified assessors. So it's a good way of just, again, validating the credibility of an organization that might be attempting to win your business or come in and help you, to make sure that they have their badges, right? And so you see the two badges that are there on the screen, the orange being the RPO and the green being the C3PAO. Moving forward, some key resources, right? We've been doing this for quite some time, helping a lot of our clients navigate these, again, kind of tricky waters. We know that CMMC and NIST 800-171 are difficult, right? Especially for small businesses. Really, the key for the CMMC was really to level the playing field. The NIST 800-171 self-assessment or requirements really stated that if you were in the defense industrial base, you had to hit all 110 controls, no questions asked, right? You had to hit all 110 controls, which was a bit unfair because they can be very costly, right? The assessments and solutions that you need to put in place are very costly. And so smaller companies, were really put at a disadvantage because it's an expense that maybe you weren't expecting or they weren't expecting. And so CMMC really kind of laid out these new rules based on the type of business that you do with the government, right? And so we've been helping a lot of our clients kind of navigate those waters because they can be quite tricky. Ideally, when you receive a contract, a federal contract, whether it's from the government or a federal contract directly from the source, or you're getting it through a prime contractor and you're subbing for them, ideally those contracts should have CUI markings or FCI markings that tell you what level you should be hitting. Now, this isn't always the case. I haven't been seeing a ton of this happening yet, but in the future it should, right? So when you do win a contract, it should explicitly say in the contract that you need, or the requirement is CMMC maturity level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. But all that said, CompuData has put together a number of resources for you all to look at, right? So things do you do today to prepare for your CMMC requirements, leveraging the right CMMC providers, and then what you need to know about getting started, right? Again, the hardest part is just getting started. Where do we start? And we encourage you to reach out should you have any questions. I will stop here for any questions, and I think I have a few kind of clarifying points that I can make as well, since we have a little bit of time on our hands. Right. So some of the questions I typically get are, when do I need to put this in place? Right. My go-to answer is typically start now, right? Don't delay, because again, we have the CMM, right? We have that first M in CMMC, which is maturity. You're going to want to prove that you have these policies, these practices, these procedures in place today, so that later on down the line, you're not scrambling to put them in place. Now, where does the CMMC stand today? Well, right now, we are getting our first round of CMMC certified professionals coming out at early next year, and we expect to have the first round of contracts for CMMC or relating to CMMC maturity levels come out late in 2022. Those are probably going to be a much smaller batch, probably about 15. But if you are a subcontractor for some of the bigger primes, again, I always use Boeing and Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman, a lot of the big contractors who are working directly with the DoD or in the defense industrial base, you may be subject to those, right, by proxy. That said, we expect to see the full rollout of all CMMC maturity model requirements starting from 2022. It's supposed to start in 2021, but of course, the pandemic slowed things down. But looking at 2022, going all the way up through 2025 and 2026. right? Where every company that's working within the defense industrial base and has either FCI or CUI will need to meet a level of certification. Whether that level is 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 is really going to be determined by your business, right? The kind of business that you are doing either with a prime contractor or a sub. If you are doing work with a prime contractor today, and you are subbing for them, it is going to be the prime contractor, or maybe you are the prime contractor. That's also a possibility, right? I have a few clients who are prime contractors. If you are a prime contractor, technically it is your responsibility to make sure that your subs meet a level, maturity level certification. So that means if I'm a prime and my subs need to hit maturity model or maturity level 1, then it is my responsibility to enforce that on them and say, hey, you need to prove to me, you have to go get certified, and you need to prove to me that you have your maturity level 1 certification. The same way that if you're a subcontractor, your primes are going to come to you, as they might be right now, with NIST 800-171. But for CMMC, they're going to come to you and say, we need you to get certified at maturity level 2 or maturity level 3, again, depending on the nature of the work that you do. So all that goes back to that one question is, when do you start? Again, start early, start now, start getting your self-assessments completed, making sure that you are in a good place to understand where your gaps are, and you give yourself enough runway to remediate those.